Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, and welcome to this online debate on access to affordable and sustainable energy for all. What can policy and regulation do? My name is Ilaria Conti. I'm in charge of strategy at the Florence School of Regulation. I'm also vice chair of the UNECE group of experts on gas. This is the first of a series of online debates that the Florence School of Regulation has the pleasure to jointly organize with the UNECE, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. This series of debates will focus on how regulation and policy can support the United Nations overall targets for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, which have been translated, as you know, into the well-known Sustainable Development Goals adopted in 2015. And in this first debate, we will address SDG 7, which relates to affordable and clean energy, but also we will look into the perspective of SDG 5, which is on gender equality. Not only because access to energy is and should be a universal right, but also because when looking at examples, real examples of communities experiencing limited access to affordable and clean energy, think about the communities, the coal communities, for example, advancing on just transition, difficulties tend to be greater for the most disadvantaged categories in the community, such as women. In the course of today's debate, we will have the chance of hearing about the concrete work that has been done or is ongoing in several regions as to reduce this gap and bring progress. So the program for today is divided into two parts. We will have two opening presentations from DG Energy, from the European Commission, and the second from UNECE. We will have with us Tig O'Brien, Deputy Head of the Unit on Consumers, Local Initiatives and Just Transition in the DG Energy. He will talk mainly about the Citizens Energy Package, which is an important contribution to the topic of today. And then we will have Ray Pilker, Chair of the Group of Experts of the Coal Mine Methane and Just Transition of the UNECE. In the second part of the debate, Branko Milicevic, my co-host here from the UNECE, will introduce the topic of the debate, of the panel debate, and also his panelists. We are very, very blessed and happy to have a really distinguished set of speakers today. So I invite now all of you, dear participants, to contribute to the debate by writing your questions, if you have any questions, in the Q&A box that you see here underneath our speaking heads. And hopefully, in the second part of the debate, I will also help Branko collecting some of those. So thank you very much for your participation, and I wish you a great debate. We will start now directly with the first presentation by the European Commission with Tig O'Brien. Tig, please.
Hi. So first of all, thank you, Lara. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Branko, for the invitation to speak here today. It's very welcome. And actually, the whole concept of having of looking at the just transition, the whole concept of increasing the social dimension of the energy transition is one that's been in energy policy for a long time, but I think it's fair to say that it's coming to the fore and taking on a new importance now as we move towards the end stages, for want of a better way of putting it, of the transition, when the really difficult parts of the energy transition are in front of us, and let's say a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been picked. So the title of my presentation is Citizens Energy Package, Enhancing Citizens' Participation and Strengthening the Social Dimension of the Energy Transition. Now, this is more or less a quote from President von der Leyen's mission letter to my commissioner, to Commissioner Dan Jurgensen, in terms of what he is expected to do in his mandate as Commissioner for Energy and Housing, to be a bit more precise, over the next number of years. And in that context, sort of shaping what it is that we expect to happen over the next number of years and what we are trying to do. So there's a commitment on him to develop a citizens' energy package. And I'm going to touch on what that might involve or some elements of it. At the same time, I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that it's not just my commissioner who's affected. And I'll just highlight one in particular. If we look at the mandate of the role of Commissioner Teresa Rivera, Vice President Teresa Rivera, excuse me, who is Vice President for the Just Transition, which shows that there's a recognized need for an overall coordinating approach to ensuring a just transition in this commission mandate. And so we are at a stage now where the Green Deal has been adopted, and it's about securing, embedding, and delivering on that. Now, I want to just mention a few things. First of all, what I am going to focus on, what I'm not going to focus on. And I say this, I'm not going to particularly focus today on the whole issue of coal transitions and the coal regions in transition, not because they're not important, precisely because they are extremely important, and I think I would use up all my time. But I just wanted to flag to you that we have a very important event coming up in Konin in Poland at the end of next month. So we're just less than a month at this stage, where we're going to have the annual political dialogue on coal regions transition, which will also look at how we can take this work forward for the rest of the time. So, and I know Ray, speaking later, will have, has a particular background in this, but I just wanted to highlight that I'm not going to go into that in particular. Instead, I'm going to focus on maybe the more general points and focus on, this idea of how we look at energy poverty as being a critical element of, we could call it a Sustainable Development Goal 7. And I'm going to look at the issue, which is maybe broader, about the participation in the energy transition and how we can help citizens and consumers actually actively participate in the energy transition and thereby develop some ownership of it. So I think, could I ask you to move to the next slide there, Lara? So the commitment is to develop a just energy, citizens' energy package during, and so this was highlighted very clearly in the Affordable Energy Action Plan, which we adopted back in February, as being one of the deliverables of the Affordable Energy Action Plan, actually a key deliverable in relation to ensuring affordability. We are now working at we're in the process of filling that in, of looking at how that will do. We intend to have a open public consultation again next month. So I expect many of you here in attendance today will be answering questions for us to you, rather than me answering questions to you today. But that will be coming, the precise details need to be ironed out, because we have to translate basically the consultation documents, and first you have to have them finished, which they are. So we have to translate them, and they'll be going out later on in the thing, in the month. But let's look then about what are the types of issues that we're doing, and what does that really fit into in terms of the citizens' energy transition, citizens' energy package, and what kinds of issues can we expect to look at, and how does that help to ensure that all citizens have access to clean and affordable energy. And I want to put the emphasis on both of those, clean and affordable, that the energy is affordable to people, but that then that energy they can afford is also clean. One key pillar that's clear is going to be just to enhance the just transition. And I'll come back to energy poverty in more detail later, but to look at what kind of measures we can have to reduce energy poverty, and what can we expect to deliver real reductions in energy poverty. And actually a related point on that is, where do the responsibilities lie for addressing energy poverty? And a related point here is we're looking at guidance on disconnections during the gas phase out. Makes it sound, actually, if you read that in shorthand, you could think about people being cut off because they haven't paid their bill for phase out. But actually, it's looking at another question, which is the energy transition means that there are many areas where gas, which continues to be the dominant fuel for most households in Europe, will be phased out. And if we look at the gas package that we adopted, the amount of, leave aside hydrogen because it's a separate, different fuel and it's not easily replicated, but if the amount of clean gas to be expected to be reduced, to reduce in the overall energy mix. And that many member states will be making decisions to phase out gas in total, or at least in parts of the area. So we really have to look at what impact that will have on those who are consuming gas now. And a related point is, as that happens, we have networks that are continuing to be paid for? Do we have for want of a better way, of a regulatory spiral where the most wealthy are the first ones to move to heat pumps and solar panels, and the people who are left are paying higher network costs, and those are the poorest and the most vulnerable and the least flexible in the society. So we'll be looking at how we can give guidance to make sure that this phase out protects the energy poor and the vulnerable. We'll also be picking up on the call by the Council, by the Council of the European Union, the Energy Council, to develop an Energy Communities Action Plan. And that call was made last year. Now, energy communities are just one of the ways in which we can empower citizens and communities. But it's a real sense of how you can have people actively participating in the energy transition, taking what's often called prosumers, which is in my personal view, an ugly word, but it's a very important concept. This idea that the consumer is not just a passive recipient at the end of a very big system, but is actually something that's able to participate in the transition as an active producer of energy, as an active consumer of energy. But that requires engaging with consumers, engaging with citizens in a different way, and increasing their sense of ownership and trust in the market. And here we could say the final pillar, and often this is presented as if, we've got the energy poor, we've got the people who are the most advanced, which I think is a false dichotomy. And then we've got the great middle, which is also a false thing. But it's like, we just have to look at making the energy system work on a day-to-day basis, of building trust in the energy system and building trust in the energy markets, because that's how most people encounter the energy transition. And right now we know, or we are fairly sure, that people don't trust the energy system. They don't trust the market. They don't think it works for them. And so we really have to think about how we can help them have the confidence that the market needs, or that the market needs for it to be able to deliver for them. I just want to flick through very quickly some points about working on these three issues. If we can flick to the next slide. What kind of benefits do we expect from this? So if we have this new way of addressing of participation in the market, we think, or we have evidence to suggest, that with an energy community, that households can save 500 to 1,000 euros a year by participating in an energy community. We had some studies done by the University of Ghent on this. We have long-standing evidence that says just by switching energy, by switching provider, there's about 150 to 200 euros being left on the table by customers who aren't able to do that. We have to ask ourselves why. And that we see some very significant savings available for consumers if they're able to become engaged in demand-side flexibility of up to 42%. Now, that's quite an exceptional figure. With easily see savings of 10%, 20% for people who are more flexible in their consumption, who are able to offer demand-side flexibility back to the market. And these are the savings that we think are possible. And these savings are deeply connected with the provision of clean energy, and a more affordable clean energy for consumers. They have to be made available for the energy poor as well. It's not something that it should be seen as an elite point. And I want to come back to that, because there are ways in which we can do that. We can support it. Now, very quickly, I want to say some of the key points that we have in terms of, if we can flick to the next way, what we're already doing in terms of supporting. And I'm just going to pick out energy communities here, where we have a lot of small individual things to help citizens and communities and actions to really participate in the energy transition, from pilot actions from the citizen-led renovation to the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, Citizens Energy Hub, to the Energy Communities facilities. We have the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub that's not mentioned here. And I put down here as well that we are supporting communities in the Western Balkans too. So it's not just confined to the EU. These are practical support that's available to consumers. And I think these are the kind of things we will build on in the Citizens Energy Package. Now, if we can flick on to the next slide, and I want to just quickly cover energy poverty, which sounds a terrible way to put it. It was like, I want to quickly cover energy poverty, when you could spend an entire career trying to address this. So what do we know? We know that the issue is very, very, very serious, and that about 10% of the population of 40 million Europeans are affected by what could be described as energy poverty, who struggle to heat their homes. And we have to look even more at the issue of cooling in the summer, and we're doing some studies on this. We know it's a multidimensional problem where incomes, energy efficiency, housing status, and energy prices all come together. What we also know is that the key point is to address the structural drivers of energy poverty, which is often the appliances and the energy efficiency of housing. And these are the key things. And how we can address that is give access to energy efficiency and access to renewable energy. And here again, I come back to the point I said about energy communities can be made accessible to the energy poor, or energy sharing can be made accessible to the energy poor. But it's not simple, and it does require support. And I'm just going to go on to one thing in terms of, actually, if we can skip 2 on, and I will stop on the whole legal framework around energy poverty, and I'll just go on to the social climate fund as one example of how we can spend money. So yeah, if you can skip on 2, and then I'll wrap up on the next one. So basically, the social climate fund has up to 87 billion that can be spent addressing the impact of the ETS2 and the increase in prices that could result in that. And it's the impact to do that. And the aim is to address vulnerable and energy poor households by supporting precisely the structural measures I mentioned before on energy power, on energy efficiency in housing, whether it is in social housing or individual projects, also in transport. And we want it to be performance-based. This social climate fund, I think, is very interesting in terms of the way it works in the planning, because it gives you if the success or failure of that over the plans are developed now will also be a key for how the next MFF will work and the approach that will be taken in the competitiveness fund and other funds that are being developed under the MFF. So I think this is a really interesting fund and a really interesting way of which we're addressing energy poverty and addressing ensuring secure, affordable and clean energy for all Europeans. So with that, I will wrap up. I'm sorry if I've gone on for too much, but this is too big a topic to keep to deadlines. And so I'm really looking forward to what everybody else has to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ty. It was actually a very efficient, I think, presentation. And thanks particularly for focusing on the concept of energy poverty, not quickly, clearly not the time that it's necessary to solve the issue. But thanks for giving us your views and your perspective on what it means, in particularly with relevance to Europe. Also, for announcing the Energy Communities Action Plan as a call by the Energy Council. I think it's all very interesting, and we will follow on all of these initiatives with you. So this said, thank you very much for the European perspective. And now we turn towards Ray Pilker for the international perspective. As I said at the beginning, Ray is here representing UNECE. As I also said before, when we were off cameras, I thank him twice because it's also very, very early in the US where he's connecting from. So thank you very much, Ray, for being with us. And you have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone my morning and your afternoon. I also appreciated the comments and presentation that Ty made. I think it is a good contrast from what I'm going to talk about. When I heard the words that uh, Ty said and looked at his slides, I thought, wow, this is great. This looks pretty regulated and pretty planned out. And when I look at the work that we do at the UNECE, because of the diversity of the ECE, it's not quite as regulated, not as quite as regular and organized. In fact, I see the diversity sometimes reflected in very, very different situations across borders in a small region. So today, I'm going to try to illustrate some of these issues by talking about linking resilient energy systems to just energy transition. First slide, please. So to understand where I'm coming from in the sense of of the work that I do and the work that the Sustainable Energy Committee does, I'd like to explain, first of all, that our group of experts in coal mine methane and just transition, which I chair, is only one of 6 expert groups. As you can see on the slide here, there's an expert group on energy efficiency, one on renewable energy, one on gas, one on cleaner electricity systems, our group, and then a group on resource management. We're working with all of these groups through our task force on just transition. Our group of experts has 3 task forces, one that I just mentioned on just transition, one on methane emissions reductions from coal systems, coal mines, and a third on safe operation and closure of coal mines. The mandate that we operate under is on the following page, but before I get there, I want to talk a moment about one of the projects that our expert groups, all 6 of them, have been involved in, which is looking at resilient energy systems. And much like some of the comments that were made by Ty, it's really something that's important from the standpoint of being, if you have a resilient energy system, you must have environmental sustainability, affordability, and energy security. All of the things that we just heard about. Next slide, please. But resilient energy systems are not just a phrase. They incorporate a number of concepts and a number of aspects that are both easy to understand, but also, I guess, very difficult to obtain in many cases. So if we think of the resilient energy system as sort of the roof that encapsulates everything, under that, we have sustainable resource management, which is really important because it's not just managing the energy resources that are being consumed at this point, but also managing access to critical raw materials that are important for any of the work that's being done now related to incorporating green energy into our systems. Next part is the integration of low, zero, negative carbon technology into energy infrastructure across the region. And remembering that I'm not just talking about the European Union, but I'm talking about Eastern Europe and also the countries that were a part of the former Soviet Union and North America. The diversity here is astounding. So the integration of low, zero, negative carbon systems into these energy infrastructures is difficult in many cases because some of these energy infrastructures are literally bordering on 100 years old. Some of them have been modernized, but only modernized 50 years ago. So we're really looking at a need to change the grid systems and a number of the delivery systems if you're talking about gas, et cetera. And then finally, scaling systemic energy efficiencies and digitalization of energy system networks. We all know that energy efficiency is an important component of any of these systems, and it's almost always, from my experience, the last thing that gets done. And that's just a matter of, I guess, human perspective. But the big things that we're talking about here in terms of energy supply are the things that often get the most attention because energy security, of course, is first and foremost in the minds of the majority of the nations that we deal with. Underpinning all of this is a just energy transition in the ECE region. And the reason this diagram is important is that it's clear to us, and it's clear, I think, as you go through what a just energy transition is. And again, like Ty, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the definitions, but thinking through that, we recognize that you can't have resilient energy systems if you can't have just energy transitions. And in fact, what we really need to understand is that energy systems are always in a matter of transition. There's always additions, and each time there's maybe slightly different aspects, or maybe different sources, maybe different systems entirely. There's certainly a push in many parts of our region to work on smaller and more manageable energy systems so that they are more resilient. In other words, the ideas of microgrids, the community energy systems that Ty was talking about, all of these are very important because they do two things. One is that they do help with energy security in terms of nefarious aspects of hacking into the energy systems and causing disruptions there, but also the fact that if there are natural disasters, which seem to be more and more prevalent, and part of the grid goes down, you have isolated systems that are able to still operate and potentially even take on a bigger role while things are being repaired and reassembled. Next slide, please. So I want to present two projects that we're working on, and two very different ones as an illustration of some of the points that I've made. One is Tajikistan, and this is a project that has gone through the first stage of, or actually two stages of discussion and report writing. And what we've seen in Tajikistan is that this country is a very resource-rich country. It has a lot of water resources, has a very well-developed and continuing to be developed hydropower system, and much of the electricity that is furnished to Tajikistan during the warmer months comes from the hydropower. However, there are a couple of older coal-fired power plants that end up being essential to the economy and the energy security of this country during the winter time because of Tajikistan's altitude. At the foot of the Tian Shan mountain range, this is an area that gets extremely cold in the winter, and consequently lakes and that are the reservoirs for hydropower and the rivers in some cases freeze up. So this means that it's not only useful to have a coal-fired power plant, but in the case of this country at this time, it's essential for them to have enough heat for the winter. And in fact, at this point, it's very clear that many of energy consumers in this country also rely on coal-fired heat within their homes, meaning that they're using coal directly either for heating and for cooking. So the idea of an energy transition in this country is, of course, something that's on the forefront of the discussions at the government level, discussions relative to how to incorporate renewable energy into the systems, but also, more importantly, how to make certain that everyone still has access to energy. This is something that Ty emphasized, and it's very, very important here because it's in a case of some consumers, it's not just a matter of convenience, it's actually a matter of need. So as we discuss the systems that are being put into place as a green economy development strategy, it's very important that we discuss all of these other facets. There is a reluctance on the part of the companies that supply electricity to do very much different than what they're doing now because it works and because of the enormous cost due to terrain and other climatic issues to make some of these transitions. And so this is one illustration. Next slide, please. Uzbekistan is different. This is a study that's being undertaken by colleagues in the Secretariat with some work from some outside consultants. The the situation in Uzbekistan is different. There's a much greater energy diversity. However, there's a huge reliance on fossil fuels. And so there is a desire to make the energy transition, to become more stable in terms of energy supply. And it's the project's focus is to introduce and incorporate the principles of just transition into the energy policy and energy transformation plans, and to identify and reach out and help develop systemic support for these the implementation and the support of these systems as they move towards higher and higher rates of decarbonization. However, if you notice what the size of this funding is, and you notice the other partners, I think you get an insight into the complexity of the system. It's being led by UNDP, which obviously is a development program, and in partnership with the ILO to look at the stakeholders that are involved in actually doing the work of the energy transition, but also those that could be left behind if the transition is not planned in such a way that everyone is looked after if this happens. And so one of the approaches that's being taken in this study is to develop scenarios and look at the outcomes of these various scenarios, and then match that with enabling policy and regulation in such a way that this transition is made in a smooth and just and equitable way. Next slide, please. So that's really my presentation. I want to wrap up with a few comments. First of all, what I didn't speak of is that one of the task forces that I mentioned, I didn't speak of something that's underway at this time. Our group has a task force on just transition, as I mentioned earlier, and this task force is actually developing a guidance document that includes principles of just transition. And I didn't spend any time talking about that because we're in the last stages of editing the document that'll be published later in the summer. But these are all principles based, and in fact, they're aligned with the SDG principles. So the idea is to give guidance as to how to make these just and equitable transitions using the SDG principles. And the reason for that is because all of the work that's been done on SDGs has left us with a number of systems to actually manage and measure progress towards achieving those SDGs under the 2030 agenda. And so with that, we are looking in many areas that are undergoing these just energy transitions, helping with the discussions that are relative to how this progress will be made, and then working with the communities that are impacted by this to find ways to make sure that their viewpoints as stakeholders are included in the systems that are being developed, the regulations that are being written, and the actual execution of those plans as we move forward. With that, I'll close, and I'll stay on for a while as we move towards the questions. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Many thanks to you, Ray. This was extremely interesting. Also, your last two slides with the concrete examples of projects that support this transition, this approach to increasing energy access in various communities. That's fantastic. I think it provides a great input for the second part of this debate, where we'll also hear more concrete examples. But enough from me. I am very happy to hand the microphone to Branko Milicevic.
Thank you, Ilaria. Now we are going to the second, more interactive part of our discussion today, jointly organized by the Florence School of Regulations and the UNECE. From our perspective, this debate deals with the interplay between the energy access, which is the SDG 7 or one of the sub-goals of SDG 7, and all others, but primarily with SDG 5 on gender. So that's why we are going to, with our participants today of the online debate, to shed some light on various aspects on from gender, youth, Africa, other developing countries, and so on. Just to introduce myself, I'm Branko Milicevic, Secretary of the Group of Experts on Gas. This is one of the 6 groups that Ray mentioned earlier. And although there is a group on dedicated to just transition, the one he chairs, the Group of Experts on Coal Mine Methane and Just Transition, as of January next year, all other 5 groups will have a dedicated activities on just transition or just energy transition. So we'll be continuing to deal with this topic in various contexts. It's not only the context of what we started, coal mines, abandoned coal mines, closing down coal mines, but also in the aspect, in the context of the work of, say, gas sector, for instance. So with this, I will just quickly go and tell you that we have 4 panelists here that will join us. This is Bruno Idini from the International Energy Agency, then Ms. Carol Ofafa, who is a project associate of the Florence School of Regulation, but also of the African School of Regulation. Silvia Sartori, who is a professional in sustainable development and gender expert. And then we have Federico Barbieri, who is, among other things, president of the European Youth Energy Network. So let's start our debate. I would start with, say, a big picture. And we'll start with Mr. Bruno Idini from the International Agency, who's been for some years on IEA's team dealing with SDG 7 within the World Energy Outlook team. He was also a lead author of the IEA's Africa Energy Outlook, the World Energy Employment, and many other reports. So we'll start with the first lead question to Bruno to have some global perspective, as I said. The International Energy Agency released recently the World Energy Outlook. So what does it say about achieving SDG 7 on the sustainable energy? Are we on track to achieve it? Because 2030 is quite close now. And if we are not, what might be needed to do now and also after 2030? Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for that introduction, Branko. Yes, we at the IEA, we've been tracking closely SDG 7 progress for many years. And just for context, SDG 7, we usually speak of electricity and clean cooking access, but it also comprises renewable sort of total final consumption, energy efficiency, as well as investment. So there is actually many other targets within SDG 7 that are not simply electricity or clean cooking. So just for those that are not as familiar with the structure behind the SDG 7 goal. Short answer is that we are not on track to meet the deadline of having universal access to sustainable, affordable energy for all in terms of electricity and clean cooking. There have been recently some both well, at the global level, like policy and momentum being generated that gives reason for hope. Another positive trend that we are seeing is the cost of like technologies such as solar PV, standalone systems, and battery technology that is being decreasing extremely rapidly. So there is a lot of technological innovation that is giving a lot of hope for this. So despite not being on track on some parts of the SDG 7 agenda, we do see that on one hand, the technology is there, the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper by the day. And at the same time, we see a lot of political momentum, which is extremely crucial. And the reason why this is as important or even more important is because it really sends a picture to potential investors and other organizations that might want to do business in these countries. And if I can have like maybe one very simple and concrete suggestion, let's say, that the IEA always tries to push for is data availability. We see a very clear correlation between higher level of investments in countries that have a reliable data compared to countries that don't have that data availability, because it's crucial to make decisions. So all the countries where we've been seeing for the past years that are doing investments in capacity building of the statistical office, and just building up that national know-how, are really reaping the benefits of higher levels of investments as well. Another issue that we're trying to encourage countries to address is that oftentimes, and maybe the most concrete example here would be clean cooking, is that these issues are sort of orphaned. You go to a country and you don't really know who's responsible for instance, clean cooking. So having a point of contact to know exactly which minister, which person within that ministry is to be contacted to address, for instance, issues related to clean cooking is of great help. Another thing that can be very helpful in sort of speeding up the progress in the SDG agenda, particularly again for perhaps again a clean cooking example, since it's one of the goals that is lacking the most behind, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where over 80% of the population lack clean cooking access. And we can talk later, as Ilaria was mentioning, about the implications for gender, women, and SDG 5, more broadly speaking. But even with the same data that might be coming, like for instance, with clean cooking access, there are massive health benefits in terms of, like the exposure to pollutants, mortality rates, etc. Like the same information that might be given by someone from the energy ministry, it's not received as well as if it was coming from someone from the health ministry or a doctor. So having that partnership between ministries and cross-cutting without these issues being siloed in the countries is also going to be crucial to be able to unlock a lot of the progress that we see that has to happen on the ground. So maybe I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to take more questions later.
Thank you, Bruno. We will move, as I said, the first round of questions, and then we will go into more interactive discussion. I think you already raised quite a few interesting questions, but we'll revisit this matter later. Now we will invite Ms. Carol Ofafa, who is an engineer who's been working from Kenya originally, I understand, but also working in Ghana, has a very unique trans-African experience, so to speak, very hands-on in renewable energy, in electric mobility, in infrastructure, and so on. So a quick question to Carol. Since you are from Kenya, as I mentioned, now in Ghana, and an engineer, when we talk about energy access, Africa has always been in focus of the whole world. And often, when we talk about things in a meeting room in Geneva, for instance, and everything sounds logical and implementable, and all of a sudden, when you have to go to a country, you realize it was not necessarily so, or in any country, not only in Africa. So in your experience, what are the most cost-effective ways to improve energy access in Africa? And then, are there something specific to Africa, or what you refer often to as African solutions to African problems?
Thank you very much, Branko, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. We all recognize the urgent challenge. So nearly 600 million Africans still lack access to reliable electricity, and this is representative of 43% of the current population. This is a stark barrier to an economic opportunity. Of course, essential services and dignity are missed, right? So to achieve SDG 7, Africa requires not only resources, but also cost-effective strategies tailored to the context of the African continent. Now, I will highlight three main opportunities that I see, and as the experience of the African School of Regulation is tailored towards improving energy access in Africa, but these are also African solutions to African problems. So number one, I'll talk about the least cost electrification and integrated planning. And our previous speaker from IEA, Bruno, thank you for bringing up the issue of data, because the foundation of cost-effective electrification is integrated planning utilizing data. So we must move away from fragmented projects and instead develop least cost national electrification plans that coordinate grid extension with mini-grids and off-grid solar systems in a single optimized roadmap. Pioneering the work by the African School of Regulation, it has shown that combining on-grid and off-grid solutions under one plan can dramatically lower costs, right? So the principle is simple. Use geospatial data and demand focus to decide which villages should get the national grid first and which are better served by the decentralized solutions. This techno-economic planning identifies the least cost mode for every community. Kenya, for example, has institutionalized least cost planning through its least cost power development plan, a rolling 20-year plan that guides generation and transmission investment. Now, this plan rigorously analyzes demand growth, generation options, and needed grid expansion. The integrated approach will pay off because in the last decade, Kenya electrification rate rose dramatically, right? So this is a very good example, from 32% in 2014 to about 75% in 2018, one of the fastest expansions on the sub-Saharan Africa. Now, in Ghana, for example, 60% of households in 2005 to 50% in 2019, we saw a rise in connections, right, with the dual approach, which means that you expand the grid where it's cost effective and deploy off-grid where it is not. It's a model for cost-efficient electrification. Number two is also something that is very close to the African School of Regulation, which is strengthening regulation and infrastructure on the continent to build the right regulatory frameworks and invest in the grid as well as off-grid solutions that would increase energy access. Now, least cost plans are only as good as their implementation. And of course, effective regulation and strong institutions are the key to this. We often say we need utility-like entities in the continent, so the African continent, committed to serving every last household that lacks access. What does this mean? Right? It means assigning clear responsibility for service to companies, whether public or private, in each area, guided by regulatory oversight for every community. Now, investing in transmission and distribution infrastructure is a non-negotiable for cost-effective access on the continent. However, we have to look at connectivity, last-mile connectivity projects as notable, such as what we've discussed in Kenya, and the support of institutions such as the African Development Bank that ensures subsidization for the last mile infrastructure. Something that I must really speak on is Africa Innovation and Community Solution. So aside from the national grid expansion and looking at integrated frameworks for electrification, African solutions to African problems are some of the most effective breakthroughs on the continent, because a classic example is the rise of pay-as-you-go solar home systems that has spearheaded in countries like Kenya and Nigeria, combining mobile money technology with decentralized solar. So you can see that African entrepreneurs are creating models that deliver electricity to low-income households without heavy grid infrastructure. Customers can pay for their solar lighting in small increments using their phones, and things that are tailored for the African rural families and peri-urban communities. Now, we have seen community technicians, in my experience as an engineer working in the transmission utility, but also working in renewable energy projects and sustainable mobility projects, technicians working to assemble solar systems, maintaining them. And these are local technicians in rural and peri-urban areas. This means that transfer of technology is also an important part of least cost success. When women and youth are engaged as active participants in energy projects, it boosts local buy-in. And this is something that I have personal experience in, founding a startup in the electric mobility space as well, that women play a very key role in the buy-in of these projects and also in the expansion of electrification projects in rural areas. And just to finish, community-driven mini-grids are another homegrown solutions that provide effective access. So in Ghana, I mentioned solar mini-grids now power island fishing communities on the Volta Lake. These projects involve community from the start. So local leaders identify the sites, the needs, and the residents are trained to maintain these systems. So African countries are also innovating in policy and financing. You find Nigeria and Ethiopia have experimented with result-based financing that gives incentives to private companies for each rural connection achieved. Other countries are adopting geospatial mapping and open data. So Kenya's Energy Act 2019, which requires each county to develop its own energy plan to meet local needs. I think that these are some of the key points where we are looking at African solutions for African problems that could actually drive energy access. And of course, I'll be open to discussing further during the debates. Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. We are going to revisit some of those questions that you raised, because Africa indeed is in a focus. Now we're going to give the floor to Silvia Sartori, who pursued a master's degree in Asian studies in Sweden, then spent something like 7 years in China, also Japan, Bhutan, Myanmar, also in the region of Middle East and North Africa, Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa. So basically everywhere, with a focus on gender and social inclusion, stakeholder engagement, communications, and so on. The question to Silvia is, as we are now moving to more away from Africa to Asia, which is a quite vast and diverse region, how have access to energy and inclusivity progressed there? Can you give us some regional experiences, and what are their key developments? Silvia.
Thank you, Branko. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers for hosting this event and to thank you for having me here today. You're right, Asia is indeed a very large and very diverse region. And as such, it's witnessing different advances with regard to access to energy and to inclusivity. However, as a whole, developing Asia as a region has probably accounted for the most significant progress that we have seen in access to energy in the last decades. The developing Asia region has increased access to energy from 79% in 2010 to 97% in 2023. So it's really a very significant progress, which is mostly accounted for big progress made by 3 large countries, Indonesia, India, and Bangladesh, which have recently reached universal access. Parallel to this, there are countries that are progressing further and are getting closer to almost universal energy access. And at the same time, I like also to point out the case of countries like Nepal and Pakistan, which are still lagging behind in terms of universal access to energy, but are progressing a lot in terms of investment into renewable energies. So for instance, Nepal between 2018 and 2022 has doubled its installed capacity, taking advantage especially of its hydropower natural endowment. And Pakistan has increased almost 3 times its investment into solar energy in just 3 years. So there's a lot of promising signs and a lot of developments in the region, so much so that about 70% of the countries in developing Asia are now considered to have reached a level of energy access of at least 90%. So it's a very high rate. Nonetheless, there are still about 100 million people that are estimated to be lacking access to energy. These are mostly concentrated in Myanmar, in North Korea, and in Pakistan. And as far as the other countries, those that have progressed significantly towards universal access are concerned, now their biggest challenge is that of reaching the last mile consumers. And what we see here is that not only on par with the rest of the world has progress lagged with the, progress first has stalled during the COVID crisis and then has resumed after the pandemic, but at a slower pace. But the progress that we now see in reaching last mile consumers is significantly slower than the one that we've seen in trying to reach universal access. That said, another dimension that I would like to highlight is that even for those countries that have reached universal access, universal per se does not necessarily equate with uninterrupted and stable access to electricity. So I would like to give, for instance, some examples from Central Asia, because these countries have already been mentioned in previous presentations, and also because that's where I'm currently working as a gender specialist in a project funded by the European Union precisely to promote sustainable energy in the region. We have countries, for instance, such as Uzbekistan, which have officially 100% access to electricity rate. Nonetheless, especially in the winter months, which can be quite rigid, there are daily shortages of electricity of up to 6 hours per day in the rural areas. And we have to consider that in these countries, the rural population still accounts for a significant share of the overall population. In Uzbekistan, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 49% of the population. So we see that even though technically access to electricity is widespread, in practice, this means that the local population still struggles to really rely on electricity. And in fact, about 70% of the rural households are still relying about 30% of the rural households are still relying on non-clean fuels for cooking. A similar case is that of Kyrgyzstan, which again has officially 100% access to electricity rate, has a rural population that accounts for about 65% of the overall population, and there up to 80% of the rural households are relying on polluting fuels for cooking, heating, and lighting. So I'd like to raise this also really to make the link to the dimension of inclusivity, which is the other key concept of today's discussion, and also linking up on what has been said earlier. Because inclusivity, first and foremost, relates very strongly to clean cooking, and in turn, clean cooking has a very strong gender dimension, because we know that girls and women are the biggest users of cooking products as a result of cultural and social practices, beliefs, and norms. And they're also, as a result, the biggest victims of lack of access to clean cooking. And here as well, in the last decades, Asia has probably accounted for the biggest progress in terms of advancing access to clean cooking. It's estimated that between 2010 and 2022, Asia has cut down the number of people without access to clean cooking from 2 billion to 1 billion. So it's the highest rate of global progress on access to clean cooking, yet we are still talking of 1 billion people without access to clean cooking. So again, these are very significant numbers, and they're mostly concentrated in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So there are very specific pockets of needs that need to be addressed. And the current projections estimate that at the current pace, by 2030, there will still be about 760 million people in Asia who will be lacking access to clean cooking. So we see that despite significant progress in the last decades, and also because of the slowdown with and after COVID, the issue is still quite severe and significant. And if I still have a couple of minutes, I'd like also to give some examples, though, of promising progresses that we see in how countries are trying to link energy issues with issues of inclusivity. And here as well, I'd like to make reference to Central Asia, where with the SECA project, we have recently conducted a number of assessments, gender assessments in the energy sector. And we have seen that there start to be some very promising initiatives that are taken both at the policy level, but also at the corporate, and I would say almost civil society levels. In the policy arena, we see Ministry of Energies, for instance, in Kyrgyzstan and in Uzbekistan, which have established gender councils. Sometimes they're called gender committees, gender councils. Some of them have started developing gender equality roadmaps or have started setting gender targets in their national policies. So these are some very concrete initial measures and steps that show that there is a growing awareness and a growing commitment to make the energy sector more inclusive. Also at the corporate level, we see the large national energy companies embedding women's councils or gender committees, gender equality boards, women affairs bodies within their organizational structure in order precisely to address gender-related aspects of energy. I'll stop at here for now. Happy to unpack this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm pleased to hear you focus so much on Central Asia, which is also our playground. We'll revisit this, and now I'd like to invite Federico Barbieri, who is a renewable energy engineer by training, but he also wears several other hats. One is as the president and co-founder of the European Youth Energy Network, and also a policy coordinator at Energy Traders Europe. The question to you, Federico, is intergenerational solidarity is at the core of sustainable development and the sustainable development goals. You have worked in many places, yet I'd like to ask you about your views about North Africa and Middle East region. How you see the interplay there between the SDG 7 and SDG 5, the one on gender, because there could be particularly sensitive. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Branko. Actually, before I start, usually when they invite me, they ask me not just to bring the youth perspective, but also to bring a bit of energy to the debate. And I don't think more energy is needed here, because Caro, Silvia, and Bruno, I think you deliver like incredible pitch. Also building on top of data, which I think is something that we really need to take well-informed decisions. And talking about the youth perspective per se, you might know that there is no specific SDG focus on youth, but they are embedded explicitly and implicitly across the 2030 agenda. The fact that sometimes they are implicit might be a barrier for the implementation or for the recognition, but I will stop and I will focus only on the SDG 7 and SDG 5 without going to my outside of the scope. And specifically on SDG 5, I believe, which is gender equality, from a point of view, it can be expanded to intergenerational equality, because most of the time, if you help women, you're also directly, indirectly helping young women. A bit of background, what we do, who we are, because for those that don't know us, the European Youth Energy Network is not just a network. It might be misleading our name. Yes, we are a network uniting 25 local and regional youth energy focused organizations across Europe. We are building the largest European network of young professionals in energy, but also we are doing what we like to call ourselves a bit of a think tank, because we create and lead projects that are relevant and impactful for young people within the energy transition, tackling topics such as energy poverty, how to engage citizens in the deployment of renewables, how to tackle this jobs and skills gap, and also what role can we play in the international cooperation, and also supporting international agencies. And here, since I like concrete things, I would like to mention and make an honorable mention. One of the initiatives that we are very proud of is called the European Youth Energy Forum. And you might wonder what does it matter? What's the connection with the MENA region? Well, this year, the forum is the 4th edition, will be hosted in Italy in October, best location from my point of view, and will be co-hosted with the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. And it will be the first regional youth energy forum. And usually we only allow the people living in Europe to apply to be eligible. But this year we open the eligibility to the whole MENA region, which means that this will be the first project. We will have 100 young people from Europe and from MENA region. We will have online trainings for 3 months, and we'll bring all of them together in person. And of course, in order to enable this event, we have we look for sponsors, and because we want to remove any financial barriers for education of young people. But I think this is the first ever event to connect so many people from 2 different regions, because our role again is also to make bridges between different regions. But sorry, Branco, I'll back to your questions. And I have 3 messages for you. The first one is, don't forget that energy access is about a gender and generational issue. And in many parts, rural part of the MENA region, Sylvia spoke about clean cooking. And I would like to make you remember that accessible to clean cooking, and also not having girls and women to walk miles for firewood or to spend time for this task, allow them to have more time for education and also for job opportunities. So clean cooking in a certain way also facilitate education, health, and it's a multi-sectoral benefits. And so this is important for the young women for a greater education. Second one, I know you might have heard this many times, but young people are not just a demographic; they are also untapped potential. I will mention some data. I'm an engineer and I love data. In MENA region, over 50% of population is under 25. But if we want to be more specific, between the age of 15 and 29, which is the youth definition according to the UN, we have 30% of population. So if you forget about the youth, you're forgetting about 1/3 of the population. So you have to recognize and remember that this group exists within your strategy or with your projects. And especially here, youth networks. I mean, our network is just one of the many around the world. they can provide digital tool, they can reach out to as many young people as possible, because networks, that's what the added value of network. Most of the time, these networks are based on volunteering, of course, because as any, let's say, startup, they go through a fundraising phase. And so it's important that we give the right space and support to those networks. And third, not last but not the least, might ask, how can we give support to this network? How can we go through the slogan of the intergenerational solidarity? And I like the terminology of inclusive investment. From experience, many funding, also on the European level, many funding are not very accessible for young people. So there is a need for targeted investment, specific for young people, specific for certain projects that we know have a big impact. And for this, I would like to mention, for example, the Youth for Climate initiatives, which grant, I think, more than 1 million euros to more than 100 projects. And also the Florence School of Regulation Lights on Women is another initiative that provide education and accessible education to those that might not afford it. So to conclude, I encourage you're listening, whether you're youth or not, to reflect what could you do internally and externally for young people, for women, and for especially young women, so they can be an active contributor to the energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. You open another can of worms here. Very interesting set of questions. Now let's move on, and we'll open for discussion. If you can show a few questions behind me or on a slide. These are, we put together those questions for discussion to talk about sustainable inclusive access, the differences between Africa, Asia, and Europe. For instance, we heard there are 40 million people in Europe that face energy poverty, but it sounds like nothing really what Sylvia said about 1 billion people in Asia still missing access to energy services, not affordable, or not to mention Africa and other challenges. Now, in different regions, we have different, say, ways of addressing those problems, finding solutions. But sometimes things can be, good practices could be replicated elsewhere. For instance, we heard from Carol very interesting cases when actually Africa is leapfrogging through a use of new financial mechanisms, instruments, technology, mobile communications, and so on, to actually do things easier than, say, in Switzerland. I have a lot of experience when banking in Switzerland. It's not always pleasant, I can tell you. Then we have some factors that can make energy access more inclusive or sustainable. Now, it really depends how we define energy access. You know, how many watts you need, how frequently, what's the quality of your energy, does your fridge work all the time, do you have air conditioning? There are many questions how we define this. And finally, when we put everything together, we can think about synergies throughout the world, about some lessons that we learn, say, in Ghana and may apply elsewhere, and what are the potential way forward. So I'd like to ask, like, collectively, you, 4 of you, but anybody else who wants to join, to tackle any of those questions as you feel, the urge to speak. So I'm not asking anybody in particular, just raise your hand if you have some thoughts to share. I see Bruno.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll just illustrate with a story something that kind of touches on all of this. I was not so long ago, I was visiting a Western African country. I was hearing from an official from the Ministry of Energy speaking, responding to a question that was about why has the electricity access rate plateaued at 85% for many years in this country? And the answer
What's the country? I'm sorry.
I'd rather not mention the country.
Okay.
Yeah, if that's okay.
But it was in West States.
It was in West Africa. And this official replied that this 15% of the population lived in a remote area and that they would need the help of an NGO or international partners to bring access to them. And I remember thinking 15% is millions of people. This country doesn't have major natural barriers, Grand Canyons, volcanoes, mountain ranges. where is this remote region where all of these millions of people are living? It turns out that they're actually in scattered low density populations all over the country. So in this particular country, I think at the time, 70% of the population was living in a human settlement with 100 people or less. So without the innovation that we're seeing now in geospatial data, like Carol was mentioning before, to develop least cost models on how to bring access to these people, it would be impossible to do it in a comprehensive way. So to really, again, stressing the point of like data is important, is crucial to know where the problem is. And maybe talking about one of the points that you have here on the screen, it's not enough to just bring, like a bunch of solar panels to some of these villages, light a few light bulbs, because then we're just lighting poverty. So that's also not sustainable. It's not going to bring the benefits that we want for sustainable development in line with many aspects of the SDG agenda, right? So it's important to think of energy planning with productive uses of energy as well, because at the end, what we have is that we don't have power, or we don't have electricity in many of these places because we don't have an economy that can pay for that power, but we also don't have power to pay for that, to power that economy, right? So it's this vicious cycle. There is no money for energy, there is no energy to generate money. So how do we break it? So it's important to look at it from a comprehensive way and try to think of like productive uses of energy, what to do with the energy that we can produce. And just to touch, one last thing on the a very good example on SDG 5 and like the gender aspect of it is that we were hearing at the IEA from the Minister of Energy of Uganda that she said that she was able to go to school, educate herself, and eventually become the Minister of Energy of Uganda because she was the second born, and the responsibilities of collecting wood fell on the bigger sister. So just to illustrate again the impacts that this can have on the life of someone, like the ability to have time to go to school, to educate themselves, which is something that also Federico was touching upon. So sorry, I'll stop there. But just I wanted to illustrate with a couple of like examples that are very close to me, some of these.
Very good, thank you, Bruno. Carol, and I think also Silvia mentioned this, the last mile problem. So the idea is this, you have resource, you have maybe energy, electricity, or maybe other resource, yet those who have to receive the service cannot afford in this to be distributed finally. And you often have a situation where resources produced, let's say natural gas in Mozambique, and it's being exported, and yet not far from the plant, which is lit with electricity and everything, you have communities that have no access to modern cooking or electricity or anything for that matter. So how we could overcome this last mile problem? Anybody has an idea? Silvia?
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up first on some points that were raised by Bruno and also answer your question, because I think one, again, stressing the link between gender and energy, I think one aspect that we might take for granted, but is far from it, is that as of now, energy policies are still generally gender blind. So for instance, we, in the course of these gender assessments we did in Central Asia in energy last year, we didn't find any specific energy policy that would make any reference whatsoever to the gender dimension. So again, so long as we do not even realize that there is, I would not say necessarily a problem, although in practice it is, that there are differences, at least in the way how different genders are impacted by and make use of energy, we can't identify suitable solutions, products, and services. And the consequence, the very first, is that the risk is that we keep perpetuating existing inequalities, and we might even generate or aggravate new ones. Secondly, and connected with that, there are still far too few women in the policy space, in the policymaking space in energy. Energy remains one of the most male-dominated sectors globally, and this applies also to representation in the policymaking space. So again, if we want energy policies, products, and services to be gender responsive, there need to be more room for women to share their views, their thoughts, but also their talents. And connected with that, we need to improve gender disaggregated data. So it's not only about getting more data, accurate data and updated data, but also having data broken down per gender and ideally also per age group, so as to take into account the youth as well. And then I also second what was mentioned before, that I think we need to look at energy as a sort of cross-sector dimension. So addressing energy access, inclusivity, and the energy transition needs to bring in engagement from other sectors as well. So I'm thinking, for instance, Bureau of Statistics when it comes to gender data, Ministry of Finance when it comes to, for instance, unlocking credit for women and women entrepreneurs. And this, I think, is the first and most precious resource that we have in reaching out to last mile consumers. So I work with a number of projects in last mile communities in Asia and in Africa. And women have really, as mentioned before already, an untapped potential to reach out to last mile households, particularly in promoting and facilitating uptake of renewable solutions. So this is, again, not just about social justice, but also about making the business case for reaching all consumers. And also, I think Ministry of Education and the education-related stakeholders are really important, because another challenge that we see in developing countries, but not only, also in Europe, is that the talent pool to power and to keep running the energy transition is not sufficient, because the existing curricula globally are still not up to date for the needs of the energy transition. So we need more professionals that will be up to the job that the energy transition will require. And this, again, engages the youth and intergenerational justice. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that even the renewable energy sector per se, not just because it's renewable, isn't necessarily more just and more inclusive. So there again, we should make sure that that inclusivity that efforts are made to make sure that also the renewable sector is truly inclusive and does not perpetuate existing inequalities, because we see in a lot of countries, Europe included, that employment of women, for instance, in the renewable energy sector is even lower than the one that we see in the traditional energy sector, which is already one of the most male-dominated. So not because it's renewable isn't necessarily just and only good and positive. So I'll stop it here.
Thank you, Sylvia. Any other reaction from our panelists?
I do have a reaction, Branko. Thank you, Sylvia, for your comment. Branko, your question, just to answer that, I think that Africa has been a bedrock for extraction, especially for energy resources. And this is a challenge that, of course, aligns with governance, but it is a problem. And like you say, the gas pipeline could be passing and a few kilometers away or a few meters away, a village exists that does not have access to energy at all. And I think that these are challenges that need to be looked at in different ways, but something, and especially answering the last question about the pathways forward and lessons learned, is that Africa has added how to do planning even when data is scarce or capacity is limited. So this spatial mapping tools and hybrid electrification models can be lessons learned from Africa and can be studied globally as solutions that have worked on the continent. Something that I would also like to add very quickly, I know we are running out of time, is that projects that are co-designed with community at the center of it, especially women and youth, and Sylvia has brought this out very clearly, they tend to last longer and deliver more impact. So, I talked about Ghana's mini grids on island communities were only successful because the women in the villages were spearheading the solution. Also, when you're looking at integrated planning and financing, you have to look at concessional capital. So innovative financial models, innovative capitals, and results such as result-based financing as well are some of solutions that could be lessons learned or pathways forward or models used to increase energy access. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. It's a good segue to Federico, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't want to ruin the mood, but I'm afraid I have to bring a bad example. So in 2019, I've been to Senegal. It was my first time in Africa, and I visited an island which was disconnected from the grid, and there was a project led by an NGO.
Gore.
Yeah. I don't recall the name, but it was in the south of Senegal, and unfortunately, this NGO, of course, provided solar panels to the community, and it was like a couple of years before. And when I arrived there, the solar panels were covered with dust and they were completely abandoned. And it was just a few years ago. And when I asked, okay, why is that? And they told me simply they just went there, they installed, they didn't really provide trainings to the locals on how they should maintain the solar panels. And I mean, this is unfortunately it's a bad example. And I hope that for the future, I mean, whenever we have a project that involves installing renewable energy, there is a specific connection between the locals and the power plant. And this can be simply done through a sort of an ambassadorship program, as they call. You basically pick 1 or 2 people, and which are they're responsible to being trained and to maintain this installation. And in this way, they will feel the ownership of the installation. They will feel a bit of a pressure because it's up to them that the community keeps receiving electricity. So I think this is what Carol mentioned before. I mean, it's important to involve them because the project lasts longer, and this should be a key component of any financing of microgrids, of decentralized power plants in developing countries.
Thank you, Federica. I think if you look in the chat, Tai provided some good example that the European Union does for the small islands part of the European Union, I believe like islands in Greece or Italy or Spain. I haven't opened this link yet, but it could serve as some sort of a lessons for other parts of the region when you can apply similarly to the island you mentioned, Federico, in south of southern coast of Senegal, for instance. Any other reaction?
Maybe Tai wants to elaborate a bit on this quickly. I don't know.
Yeah, Tai, please.
I might just very quickly say I find it very interesting, and I was very interested in what Carol was saying about the community support being essential for a success of a project. And it's one of the things we do in my part of the thing is try to work with communities inside Europe, and indeed this is. I mean, it's important that we balance the idea of the engineer coming through with the hard hat, building the wires and everything, with the sense of actually how is this being developed locally, local engagement, local participation. We've seen quite a lot of success on the islands in developing in this in a slightly different context, but still relevant, of moving from a system of having very fossil fuel intensive, very expensive generation on European islands, and trying to turn it into clean energy things where it's based on renewable and local resources. And actually where we see the greatest success is where you have that participation and local engagement that you spoke of. Certainly that's our experience in Europe, as well as I think what you were saying is your experience in the mentions that you said in Africa. In Kenya, I think was one of the examples you gave for that I was very interested in. Our one is basically, and we've had a lot of international interest in this project on clean energy for EU islands, also from islands in North America, islands in other parts of the world, and indeed some of the island states most affected by climate change. And this engagement of how you don't have to think of the traditional large scale energy rollouts, but also the microgrids that you mentioned and the small grid systems that you mentioned. I think that was very, very, very interesting. And I just want, but the additional point about the local engagement really supporting the success of this project and of a success of a move towards a decentralized energy system.
Thank you, Tai. So I think this is a good suggestion to Ilaria to try to organize the next such discussion in Capri, if possible.
I'll do my best.
Yeah,
I would take an island off Senegal as well, very happily.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I think I'm not sure, but I think we are running out of time, Ilaria. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have just 6 minutes left. Unfortunately, we have to close really at the half hour. So we have just a few minutes for conclusion. Well, I think the very first conclusion is that this discussion was badly needed, and I think it was extremely interesting and successful. thanks to the contribution of each of the speakers and panelists who contributed today. So I really have to give a big thank you to everybody who accepted kindly to participate and contribute with such diverse expertise, which helped really making the picture much more complete. So thanks also to Ray, who had to leave unfortunately beforehand. Well, in terms of conclusions, I think the discussion is anything but closed. So I would foresee more occasions to continue this discussion. But I think we have perhaps taken a good perspective on what can policy and regulation concretely do to contribute to achieving these sustainable development goals. And clearly, we didn't start from the easiest ones, energy access and gender equality, but we learned a lot from our speakers that policy and regulation can do a lot. So starting from the high level, providing the general framework and vision, and we heard from the Commission, from UNECE, what are the principles, what is the need to be effective? So what's the direction particularly? But also from IEA, we heard that data is extremely important to make sure that policy can be focusing on the right targets, and the regulation can therefore be effective. This is extremely important. But then going more to the practical level, we heard so many examples and virtuous examples from Carol, from Silvia, from Federico of how regulation and policy can be translated into effective practices. And I was really impressed by the idea of engaging with local communities and local leaders, also by the Kenya initiative to suggest that each county develops its own plan for interconnection. Integration is clearly a keyword here in the whole discussion, making sure that the local communities interact among each other. And then going forward from Silvia, the call for non-gender blind policies, I think, was also an extremely important reminder to all of us, because especially in the context of SDG 5, the very first step is really to ensure that policies do not forget anyone behind, no, as we said, for the just transition. So gender-related data also very important, and the importance of networking and representation, having ambassadors, like the good work that Federico is doing with his association, particularly to engage the younger generations that are indeed the future, and it's not just a fake or prefabricated sentence. We heard also we heard positive novelties, particularly from Silvia, about progress in Asia and in several countries. We also she also reminded us of the important targets that still need to be met, and they are equally important, and we need to work towards them. So I think overall this debate was eye-opening to me, for sure. I am sure for many of the participants too. We had a good attendance, over 60 people. So I think this is just a good sign that there is interest in these topics, and we will continue working on them. So I will just conclude by, before giving the final word to Branko, final words of wisdom to close the debate, I just want to finish by thanking all our speakers and Branko for co-hosting and helping with the overall organization of this debate, also from the scientific perspective. And of course, my colleague Tomiri Samirova, who is in the background. You haven't seen her, but she's the wizard behind the organization of this debate. So final word to Branko, and thank you very much to all the UNECE colleagues in Geneva and elsewhere.
Thank you, Ilaria. This is our first in a series of such online debates. We are trying to keep them interesting, interactive. We'll be attacking other components of SDG 7 and the whole UN agenda. Especially, we are now practically less than 5 years away from the end of this cycle, and we have to think about new models or something that would say, for instance, incorporate youth before Federico gets old. A discussion, maybe a new framework and the data for a new framework could be also interesting. So with this, I think, thank you all again, and please share your ideas with us, and I hope to stay in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Till the next one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.